better? We have, since the last meeting, lost Dermot Murphy to the turquoise onslaught, so we have had to say goodbye to him. The next item on the agenda is the minutes of the last meeting. I've had a look through them and I'm happy to move them from the chair. Is anybody happy to second them? Has anybody got any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? All those in favour of adopting the minutes? Anyone against? That is carried. No urgent business. Public participation will occur as we go through the agenda. Declarations of interests. I do not have an interest of my own to declare. Ginny.
Well, I think we've all got a declaration of interest on the North Lees one. So,
okay. Mike.
And the other one is that Jane Newman is known to members of the committee, as she was, most members of the committee, because she was previously a senior officer here.
Okay, thank you for noting that. Ken? No, that was just... The same one? Okay, sorry, I should have noticed those, sorry. Right. No other declarations, by the way? No, okay. Agenda item 6, the Smalldale plantation, Bathamgate Road, Smalldale. You're dealing with it, John?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. This is the application site. It's located off the south side of Bathamgate Road, near Smalldale, and to the south of the village of Peak Forest. It comprises of a 2.66 hectare area of woodland, which is covered by a tree preservation order. I will just zoom to the next plan. As we saw on the site visit yesterday, the site slopes somewhat steeply up from the Bathamgate Road, and in the northeast corner the site there is vehicular access, which gives access off the main road into a small hard standing for around 2 vehicles. There is an informal footway, no formal surfacing, up into the woodland. This red application site area here just indicates the route of access to the proposed building. There's no intention in this application to create any formal surfacing of that. And the proposal is to site a small forestry building on the upper part of the wood. We saw on site yesterday it slopes up steeply from the road. In the central area there is a bit of a plateau, and at the very top of the woodland it plateaus out again. There's open countryside to the south, north and either side of this woodland. You'll see in the photographs it's an isolated block. There is a public right-of-way, a bridleway comes from the north, joins the road here, and then from this point onwards it is a footpath. So it's a full application for a storage building for forestry purposes in connection with the applicant's ownership and management of the woodland. You'll see in the report that we have approved consent because the woodland is covered by a tree preservation order, so the consent has been granted for works to the wood, which is set out in a 10-year woodland management plan, which has got 7 years left to run. Let's just zoomed a little bit, showing the position. So as you get up to the top of the site, the proposed site of the building would require the removal of some trees, which would then be used in the construction of the building itself. We'll see in the detail of the building in the next slide. Removal of those trees would create more of an open glade for the building, and there are no concerns about the loss of those trees, which are covered by the within the plan. Details of the proposed building itself: it would be constructed very minimal impact on the ground, with just logs harvested from felling within the woodland itself. Small size, 4 metres by 3.4 metres. There's a door on one end and a couple of windows on one side. It'll only be 2.85 metres tall. The requirement for the building is set out in the report by the applicant. He says he requires this to store tools, hand tools, and a quad bike and trailer in connection with his management of the woodland, and to carry out the works within the woodland management plan itself. So I'll just go through a few slides now just to show the context. So this is Batham Gate Road, taken from just inside the access point. You can see our authority vehicle there parked on the verge between the road and the gate. And just to the left here is the hardcore parking area where it's largely revegetated, so it appears quite green. And you can see the woodland rising up to the left of this slide. That's just again looking out from the access northwards to show you the context of the open agricultural land which surrounds the woodland. And this is the very informal pathway up through the trees from that parking area. Once you get up into the woodland, we saw yesterday these are the trees marked with the tape which are due for removal and to be incorporated into the construction of the building. It's just, you can just begin to see in this slide the open agricultural land beyond to the south of the woodland. And then the tape roughly shows the footprint of the building in this slide, which we saw on site was marked out yesterday. Just panning around just to show you the nature of the woodland. And then this is from the wall at the back, just showing the open agricultural land. So there are no concerns here, particularly about the design of the building, using reclaimed logs, etc. The nearest properties are some distance away, so there's no concerns about amenity for neighbouring properties. And as the tree works were all approved by our tree officers under the TPO consent, there's no concerns about the works of the trees themselves, which are all authorised. In landscape terms, the small nature of the building and its location set well back within the woodland means it would be largely screened from public view. There might just be a distant view from the south through the trees in the winter months, but the distance from the nearest road to the south, coupled with the small size of the building and the materials it would be constructed of, would mean it wouldn't be conspicuous if visible at all. The key issue in this application is the policy principle. Our DM policy, DME1, allows for the principle of a new forestry building where it's demonstrably required, where it's demonstrated, that the building is functionally required for the forestry purpose, assessed against the relevant criteria set out in that policy, which we included within your report on page 18 in paragraphs 30 to 31. The woodland management plan itself sets out the works to be undertaken, and paragraph 39 of your report on the following page, page 19, sets out the list of tools and equipment that the applicant states he requires for the works and why he can't bring them to the site as and when required. The officer view set out in your report is that a permanent building is not functionally required to carry out the works in the woodland management plan. We consider that one could reasonably bring the hand tools to site as needed in a normal vehicle. The only exception is the applicant's proposed use of a quad bike and trailer to move timber around the wood and to bring it down to the access gate. However, the woodland management plan is clear that only a limited amount of timber could be removed from the site. And we heard at the site visit yesterday that the timber to be removed is small scale and for the applicant's own personal use at his home. The majority of the felled wood is to be left in situ. The objective of the plan is that large diameter fallen wood and some smaller diameter felled wood is left to enhance biodiversity on the site and around the woodland. Furthermore, given that most of the felling takes place in the compartment nearest the access point, we don't consider that the functional need is there to house a quad bike and trailer permanently on the site, as the timber could be cut in smaller pieces and feasibly easily removed from site into the applicant's car and taken away. We do applaud the applicant's intentions and for the sustainable management of this woodland and to enhance its biodiversity and structure, but it's a high bar to pass the policy test. We consider that whilst it may well be desirable to have a building on site, the policy requires a functional need, which in our view hasn't been met in this case, hence our recommendation of refusal, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one speaker, Jane Newman. so we're ready when you are.
Thank you, Patrick. Well, good morning, committee. In 2016, the National Park Authority decided to sell Smalldale Plantation because it wasn't commercially viable and it was a cost to the authority to manage it. The woodland is important for biodiversity and landscape, and there is a tree preservation order on the whole woodland. Since that first sale, there have been a number of owners and issues with unauthorised leisure buildings, such as cabins, which have been the subject of enforcement investigations and have been removed. My client is the third owner since the National Park Authority sold the woodland and bought it 2 years ago. He intends to manage it as a woodland philanthropically in his early retirement. My client has been on several woodland management courses to be sure he's doing things properly. He's paid for a woodland management plan which identifies some ash dieback felling to be done in years 1 to 7, then ongoing woodland management. Management includes selective felling and moving felled trees into deadwood hedges for biodiversity. The plan has been approved by the authority's tree officers. The woodland management plan is more detailed in the short term, but continued works to manage the woodland will be required in perpetuity. The Woodland Trust's latest State of the Nation's Trees and Woodlands report finds that existing native woodlands are isolated in poor ecological condition, and there has been a decline in woodland wildlife. Enhancing and protecting existing woodland and trees is a priority outcome of that report. Your own Peak District Nature Recovery Plan references that and concludes that in the National Park, without management, woodlands may become overshaded and lack the diversity needed to support plants, animals and fungi. Your management plan identifies that you will work with landowners to deliver nature recovery. The woodland is over 6 acres and the building we're seeking is very modest. Domestic gardens are often 100 times smaller than this woodland, but a shed is still required to store tools necessary to maintain them. It's not unreasonable to propose that a small building like this is necessary to manage this woodland. The building is proposed to be located well away from the road to reduce the crime risk, in an area where trees will be felled in any case due to ash dieback and away from protected species. It will be constructed using wood from the site and no new tracks or accesses are proposed. My client lives 35 miles away from the site in suburban Cheshire. He doesn't have a pickup truck or a trailer to tow, quad and transport saws, loppers and chainsaws to the site. And even if he did, he doesn't have anywhere to store a quad at his house. Without support to manage the woodland by the provision of a very modest building to store equipment, this will be a significant barrier to the management of the woodland. You run the risk that there isn't another individual who has time, money and philanthropic will to invest in the management of an unprofitable woodland and who also lives somewhere with room to store the necessary equipment and has a suitable vehicle to transport them to the site. The benefits to the National Park and wider society of the proper sustainable management of the woodland would run a very real risk of being lost. Surely when selling the woodland, the authority could not have hoped for a better outcome than it being managed for recovery by an individual like my client, with the skills, time and money to invest in the woodland just for its own sake. I ask that you work with my client in delivering the recovery and management of this woodland by permitting the development. Just one other thing, the report doesn't mention, but I've noticed from the Peak Forest Parish Council minutes on the 1st of April that they're actually in favour of the proposal. That's recorded in their minutes.
Thank you very much. Right, members, Bill.
When built, unless there's a sort of dramatic sort of storm and all the trees, a lot of the trees come down, and it seems to be the applicant has got a genuine use of the woodland as well. But however, the national park policy is clear, and I think that by granting this application, it would drive a hole in that policy, because there are countless areas of similar woodland where people would like to build structures, and I know that is it's a well-known fact that people buy bits of woodland and put shelters in and use it for different uses, and I say that's not the case here. But once the structure is given consent, then that lasts forever regardless of the ownership, and that can be used for different purposes in the future. So that's a very important policy which I think we should maintain, and I don't believe the case has been made for agricultural implements and storage or agricultural storage on the scale that's been suggested. For such, it's quite possible to hire a quad bike or take one to site for occasional use. It's not going to be used every day or every week or even every month. there are and as I say, there are countless woodlands where owners could ask for similar treatment, and that would result in a rash of buildings throughout the Peak Park. We refused a similar, not the same, similar sort of application at Carver Bridge about 2 years ago, and I think there were sort of similar issues there. It's interesting that several unauthorised buildings on the site have already been subject to action or been had to be removed. So, you know, that is the context, really. Thank you.
Right, I've got Mike Chaplin.
Thank you, Chair. Can you take us back to the picture of the route up to the proposed building site? Well, it was the plan view. That's not quite the route we took yesterday, and I couldn't see it. I take it there need to be some felling, maybe to get that the north-south part of that trackway in, because it wasn't possible for us to make a straight beeline. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just comment on that, is that, you know, there's no intention to create a formal trackway. You know, that pathway you saw on the photographic slide was just a bit of footwear showing a route through. As part of the planning application, you have to provide an access to the development site from the public highway, and that's what the applicant has done in this case, but there's no intention for that to be any formal route. And once you're in through the gateway, carrying out the works and woodland management plan, you'd peel off in all different directions and walk through the route. So there's no need to fell trees to create access or slavishly follow that line there. That's more of a requirement of the application than a formal intention. I hope that answers your question.
It is a minimalist structure using materials from the woodlands, so there's no intention to install plumbing and drainage and any electricity or anything, or run power generators. So I don't have quite the same anxiety as Bill on this. I just, given it's the national park that gave up this land and it's now gone to a third owner since, I just worry that we're depriving people of the tools to do the job in a way that in the past it would have been done by farmers, because it would have been part of an agricultural estate that would have been much larger, and instead we've just got these smallish plots, and if they're not maintained, then you get dense growth. I just wonder if we've got a policy that fits the modern purpose rather than the other way around.
Actually, let's hear what the other two members have got to say, and then I'm just going to say something myself, and then we'll move on. Kath.
Thank you, Chair. As someone who has land that's used for growing trees, Peak Park actually supplied trees to one of the wheels. We have the rest of the other. We've had terrible, near Stanton Moor, we've had terrible evidence of, they've even brought trays of food to make fires in the woodland. I mean, it's really dangerous, some of the things that we've experienced, and so obviously you need equipment to guard and try and keep it as safe as possible. So I quite understand this is in open countryside, there's nothing to stop if they don't have somewhere to store the tools and such like. The same thing happening here, and so I have every sympathy. Most of us will plant trees, do it because we care for our environment, and really for not anything else. And so to see hard work, treated in this way is unforgivable. So anything that will benefit looking after this woodland in the form of some sort of building, so the equipment can be put in there, I am all for, because of all that we've experienced. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ken?
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask about this, whether this location plan was indicative rather than absolute, because to my mind we were much further, much closer to the left hand, the western boundary yesterday than we were to the southern boundary. But you know, if it is indicative, that's fine by me. Again, as ever, we're a bit on the cusp of issues. I can quite appreciate, from having walked up the slope yesterday, that the topography is a significant factor in the management of this woodland, both for renewal, replanting, carting fresh young trees or whatever the process is up those slopes. As someone who has to supply 2 wood-burning stoves, carrying bags of even 15 logs is quite strenuous. They're quite heavy, and I can quite see why, even if it's for domestic use, the use of a trailer would be beneficial. I, on the other hand, can quite see that there is a policy principle, as Bill has outlined, and I think we have to think carefully about the balance between the policy principles and our desire, as has been mentioned by other speakers, to maintain and enhance woodlands in the Peak District landscape. There is part of me that acknowledges the amount of rural crime that occurs, and I don't mean this in a derogatory sense or a humorous sense particularly, but we might be doing the applicant a favour by refusing this, because I think if there's a quad bike in a shed in a remote wood, it's going to be there for about a month at most before it's nicked. I think that is not our consideration, I think, but it's something that the applicant needs to bear in mind. At the moment, I'm not decided. I'm quite happy to listen to what any other members might have to say, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much. If you just excuse me, Matt, and then I'll come back to you. Something that's occurred to me since we spoke this morning, and I'm just trying to follow it through. Page 19 of the report refers us to, in paragraph 38, refers us to policy DME1, which is set out on the previous page, page 18. And what that says is that in assessing need, we will have regard to certain criteria. And it sets those out. And if I can just go through those criteria in turn to really understand it. From the report, I don't know whether there's something we don't know about, but from the report, there is no problem with items little 1 to little 4. A little 5, 6 and 7 appear to be about agriculture or some other issue. From the report, there's no problem with criterion 8 or criterion 9. And the report doesn't actually positively address criterion 10. And that says that in assessing functionality and need, we will have regard to the contribution to the authority's objectives, e.g. the conservation of valued character as established in the landscape strategy, etc., to protect the landscape. Now, isn't that what is actually happening here? That they're making a contribution to the landscape by looking after this woodland. And I'm wondering how we're able to say, on the basis of those criteria, which is the ones we have to work on, that there is some other test of need which is not specified in that list, because that seems to be what you're saying. You have reached the conclusion that they can pack everything in the back of the car and drive over there, but that's not one of the criteria set down in that policy. Have I got that right? And if not, why not?
Well, it's a judgment that you're making, isn't it, as to whether the applicant's case meets those criteria. And yes, in terms of 10, yes, it is making a significant contribution to conservation of the special qualities of the national park. But we've placed weight on in looking in detail at the criteria too, looking at the type of forestry that's to be practiced and the works that are going to be carried out in the woodland management plan on the holding, and criterion 3, the intended use of the building, what it's going to be used for, and link that back to the functional requirement. And it's a judgment. In our judgment, is that the building isn't required, a permanent building isn't required on site to house a quad bike to carry out those works within the woodland. We agree it would be desirable to have a quad bike, but not functionally necessary. All the works could be carried out without that. And that's a judgment. Members are entitled to come to a different judgment and place weight on the criteria in a slightly different way, should you so feel.
Could I ask two other questions, actually? How permanent is this building? I mean, looking at it on the plan, it doesn't seem to have any solid foundations or anything. I don't know whether that's right or not. What's its life expectancy? Can somebody help me with that?
Well, it's constructed of timber from the site itself, so you'd reasonably expect it to be there for at least 10 years.
Yeah, so if the concern is about a permanent building, I suppose I should ask, A, whether we need to be concerned about that, given the nature of this building, or secondly, have we discussed with the applicant the possibility of some other structure that will definitely be of a temporary nature? Because, I mean, my reading of this is that it's not unreasonable for them to want somewhere of some sort. But I do understand the difficulty of a permanent structure that will probably never be moved. I'm struggling a little bit with this.
Yeah, of course, a permanent consent would mean that the applicant can renew the building, repair it over time, so it'd be there for essentially forever. But noting what you say, I've not been party to any discussions about any shorter period of use, but we have a woodland management plan that sets out works to the woodland over a 10-year period, of which there are only 7 years left to run. So, one could reasonably link something to that period of works, requiring the applicant to come back at the end of that period and see what is required in a new woodland management plan at that point in time. So that could be within your thinking.
Okay, thank you very much. Matt?
Yeah, in some ways it's related to that. There was a case where there was a forestry worker applied for planning permission for a house within a SSSI woodland which they wanted to manage, and it was conditioned that it was there whilst they were living in it and working in it. But obviously it was a conditioned thing. So could you put a condition on this to say this is in line with the management plan? You would have to come back and ask for planning permission if you wanted it for longer than that, but you could have planning permission for 10 years, whatever, which seems completely reasonable. I think again, I thought Patrick's point was a really good point, and at the last authority meeting we had conversations about, and I'm not making assumptions about this. I'm just putting it out. We had conversations about how people are accessing land within the national park. Effectively, what we're saying is you can only access this if you have somewhere to store a quad bike at home, a vehicle to tow a quad bike to where you're going. And, so we're sort of automatically, inherently insisting that somebody has, somebody is going to be accessing this wood using by vehicular access. So we're insisting that whoever manages this wood, if they manage that with this, with the quad bike, which they've said they needed to do, we're insisting that they drive to the site, which seems contrary to some of our other policies and aspirations. When they could put it there, leave it there, and could access it by walking to it or cycling to it. That might not be possible. That might not be feasible. But it's from a policy point of view, it seems weird that we're insisting that that's what they do.
Thank you very much. Any other members wish to contribute? Bill?
Yeah, just to come back. Yeah, there's lots of valid points. I've listened very carefully to all those points, lots of valid points. And I've sort of got a feeling of how this is going. But so I just a couple of points. I think one, I hope it doesn't mean that where someone's got lots of parcels, lands and lots of forestry, that means they can have a structure at each of those. That's a logical conclusion of what some of the things we're saying. I'm sure we're not saying that, because then you could argue that you need, farmers or foresters or whoever need a structure on each individual parcel. That would be nonsense, wouldn't it? Because people, have a home base for their things. So, and I think when you go into owning land or owning forest, that's something you think of beforehand, not after the event. But however, I do think the thought of a limited, a conditional limiting the time span, and that's up for renewal, that can be reviewed, that's attractive. And I also think that it's a bit worrying, the track is a bit worrying, that plan, although it isn't a track, but there could be some condition on to say there should be no permanent track on the site, which could be something which I think would be detrimental to the woodland as well.
Okay. Martin?
Right. I didn't actually go up to the actual site, but was looking at the site from down below. The requirement for this building it appears to be solely for the purpose of the woodland management plan. And could it in some way permission be tied either by saying that it lasts as long as the woodland management plan, or by some period of time, like 10 years, which is the time of the woodland management plan, so that what is essentially a temporary structure which could be removed. The only things I can see which have any, which could be considered of any permanence, and that wouldn't be particularly, would be the paving slabs at each corner. So it would be perfectly possible to for such a permission to be granted if that's available.
Yes, that would be perfectly possible.
Has any member got any proposal to make? In that case, I'll make one from the chair to float how it goes, how it might. Have you got any, if we were minded to approve this, have you got any suggested conditions?
Yes, as you'd expect, I've given that some thought, and if you were minded to give a temporary consent, I would suggest that's temporary for the duration of the woodland management plan, and that the building be removed at the end of that period. That the second condition would be to carry out in accordance with the submitted plans for the design of the building, limit the use to forestry use only in connection with the work set out in the management plan. I said already, probably remove when no longer required, which would be rolled into that first condition. And then no surfacing of the access or creation of other access, formal access tracks within the woodland.
And presumably no services or underground services?
None are proposed, but we could have the belt and braces and add that as well, Chair, certainly.
Okay. And remind me when the woodland management agreement finishes?
It was from 2022 to 2032, so there's 7 years left to run.
Right. Sorry, before you... I've got Kath first and then Mike. Jane, would you just come forward a moment, please? Just before the avoidance of doubt. Do you see the way the conversation's going? Do you have any comment on that, briefly?
Just that it might be a good idea to give an additional, if you're doing it by time in terms of the number of years, it might be a good idea to give a bit of leeway and an additional year at the end, because at the end of the woodland management plan, will be adopting a new woodland management plan. So it would help to deal with that, you know, that transitional period between the existing woodland management plan and any new management plan.
So we should do it by date. In other words, sorry, Brian?
So I'm very happy for the way that discussion's gone and you've explored some other options, but I'm just wondering, in process terms, there have been some counter issues raised about, you know, the principle and the judgment on the functional requirement for the building. We still should vote on the proposed recommendation first.
Well, we can't vote on anything until I got a motion.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that you don't change that before we've fully explored what's on the table.
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying, but I'll come back to that. I've got Kath and then Mike.
Thank you, Chair. You can have all the management plans you want in the world on a plot of land, but when people come up, trespass onto your land, they bring food trays, they saw down trees, make fires, cook that food. I'm sorry, it doesn't work. That's what we experience going up to the moor. And it's very sad when you spent all that time and effort trying to do something for nature and it backfires on you like that.
Thank you very much. Mike?
Sorry, I was just absorbing what Kath was saying. Although it does seem to me this is in a more isolated spot, but any place, I imagine in the Peak District, could be vulnerable to what Kath has just described. Yeah. I was going to suggest if we need to go through process, I am happy to remove the recommendation as it is, but I suspect it will get defeated.
So I'm not sure why you have to do that. I don't understand that. Could you explain?
You don't need to if you want to. No, you don't need to if you're going to. Whatever is moved, as long as whatever is moved is cleared, is clear and seconded, it can be different to the office's recommendation.
Yes. So I think well, can I deal with Mike first? If you're moving something, Mike,
I'm happy to remove the recommendation as you have described.
So you're moving it for approval.
Yeah.
With those conditions,
yes.
John, and with an end by date, as has been discussed a little bit after the end of the agreement. That's clear, is it, to everybody? That's moved by you, is it? Right, Matt.
Yeah, this is now going to be more complicated because it's now going to have to be an amendment to the, to the proposal, which means we have to vote on that rather than having the conversation. But anyway.
Put your amendment in.
So I completely accept the point that was made around the point that Jane made, that you know that there's likely to be another plan after this. You would hope that there's another plan after this, and you know it would. I think your point about policy, you know, this is different from some of the other policy conversations that we've had. You could make a judgment on the policy to say that this actually is not opposed to the policy because of point 10 in the policy thing. And so, you know, in other situations where we voted against things, where we've approved things which went against policy, you know, we've had to come back and say we need to have a conversation. You know, we need to bring the motion back to vote against something because it's against the policy at the next time. I think that you're right that you could reasonably justify that this supported that part of that policy, and so it's, you know, it's. I don't think it sets a precedent because of that reason.
I would agree with that. I thought you were going to move an amendment of some.
It was about the time, and it was about the time. There was another thing. There was another bit of the conditions that I wanted to change, but I can't remember what it was.
Well, I tell you what.
Can you read the conditions out again?
Yes. So the first condition will be a temporary consent for the duration of the woodland management plan plus the extra year as requested by the agent, in accordance with the submitted plans for the design of the building, forestry use only in connection with the work set out in the woodland management plan, removed when no longer required, obviously at the end of that period. No surfacing of access or creation of any access tracks in the up to the building or within the woodland, and no services to be laid to the building.
Making a fuss. That's great. Thanks.
Okay, well, before we go any further, I'm just to move things moving, I'm going to second Mike's motion so that we know exactly where we are in the process. Right, now, Rachel, you're going to...
I mean, that's fine, but like my point's going to take us back to a previous conversation because it isn't about process. But I do just want to comment because I think I've got some experience in this area, having worked as a countryside ranger for 10 years and delivering lots of woodland management. So I want to talk about proportionality, and I want to talk about proportionality of the building that's proposed. And I think I don't think it's necessary to have a quad bike on site as the first point. I do think it probably is necessary and acceptable to have a building that houses other equipment. And the one thing that I would like to add to the conditions is about the track, because woodland, like ancient woodlands and woodlands that have been there for a long time, their soils are really, really important for carbon sequestration. So if we are driving quads all over it and even making sort of visible tracks that aren't surfaced, that's damaging the integrity of that soil structure. So I think we do need to think carefully about whether we're going to allow and permit the action of quad bikes in that space as well. So, you know, I would suggest that, you know, the owner could seek to potentially once a year bring a quad bike in, have it delivered to site and do the necessary works in that way, rather than having a permanent quad bike on site. That would be my recommendation. So what I'm saying is, proportionally, I think the building that is being requested is reasonable. But, you know, I would question the functionality of needing that quad bike on site permanently.
I think probably that message will have been heard on the back row over there. I'm in no doubt that the owner's got goodwill in what he wishes to do to this site from what we saw on the site visit yesterday. And I'm sure that message will have got home. Yes, but I don't know that we can condition it, which is another issue. Right, any other members got anything to say on this subject? In that case, we have the motion in front of us on the conditions set out. All those in favour? That's everyone bar one. You're abstaining. And those against? No. Okay, that is carried. We are now virtually at the end of the timing in this meeting, actually, that we've got on the programme here. Oh dear. Right, the next item we've got on the agenda, perhaps we can move this one along a bit quicker, is agenda item 7, the Lodge, Manchester Road, Sheffield. Hollow Meadows, as it is otherwise known. Right, John?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, this is a full application for alterations and extension to an existing residential unit, use class 2, at the Lodge, Manchester Road, Sheffield. Application site is on the screen behind. The Lodge at Hollow Meadows, it's a residential care home situated off the A57 Manchester Road at Hollow Meadows, next to the old hospital, which has been long since converted to residential apartments. So these are the nearest residential properties here, residential apartments. They have their own access. Access to this site leads up from Manchester Road. You've got the former lodge building, which has been extended, we saw on site, at the rear and to the side with a conservatory link. And in 2021, following an appeal, the inspector allowed 3 detached residential units. And this application concerns the westernmost detached residential unit here, which is orientated north-south. So that's the layout at the moment. And as proposed, I've got the slides first just to show you the context. So this is the original lodge building, conservatory extension to additional accommodation for the residential care home. Behind that are 2 further detached units, and this is the subject building. You can see it's constructed of natural stone, hard rose slate roof with roof lights, and I think they aluminium dark coloured doors and windows. A closer view, and then a sideways view, which we saw at the committee site visit yesterday. So the proposal is to extend on this side with a 1.5-storey extension in matching materials. This retaining wall will be needed to a slight extension to accommodate that, and there'll be an increased surfacing around the building itself. So as the layout at the moment, you've got a couple of bedrooms upstairs and downstairs lounge kitchen areas. As proposed, this is the extension you can see projecting off the west side. It will provide a lounge area at ground floor, a small office, ensuite bedroom for the downstairs bedroom in the existing building, and upstairs it will provide an ensuite bedroom. You can see as well on the ground floor plan, you've got additional planting to the front and the side, and this is the extended patio area and the extension of the retaining wall, just to hold back that rising bank at the back. In elevation terms, that's what we're looking at. On the west side, the top, there's no change to the lower east-facing elevation. And as proposed, you can see the extension, its scale, still subservient in this view to the host building, with matching materials and detailing. And the other elevation looking up the drive, the top view, as existing and as proposed. Whilst it is a little long, the extension, you could argue, nevertheless it's in the context of the group of buildings. There are no concerns about the scale or massing or the design of it. The key concern really was landscape, how it appears in the wider landscape. There's no concerns about amenity in relation to the neighbouring properties because it's on the west side, furthest away from them. And in landscape terms, I'll move to the second plan because that's more important, because this is the plan which provides additional landscaping. And we saw on site yesterday, the driveway up to the site is currently, there's no boundary between what is curtilage for the C2 care home use and what is open countryside to the left-hand side of the site, and indeed in front of the site itself. And this proposal puts back in a proposed hedgerow all the way up the left-hand side of the driveway, which goes around the proposed extension, and we have agreement that that will be extended right up to the northern boundary, provide a good defined edge between the open countryside and the business use beyond. The additional tree planting on the boundary and around the building itself would provide adequate landscaping to help mitigate the fairly small visual impact of the new extension over what's there at the moment. And it also provides the significant uplift in biodiversity net gain to meet that requirement. So in officers' view, the principle of an extension to this is accepted by policy, and there are no design, landscape, amenity or other concerns, hence the recommendation of approval, Chair.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Without wanting to confuse it with previous appeal decisions, but there were conditions set, for the landscaping of the site, and I think some of that clearly hasn't been done yet. And it's really critical, I think, to the whole landscape character of that open corridor through there. We're trying very hard over time to achieve enhancements to various sites along there. I would just ask a question as to whether there's any scope for a condition that could require landscaping scheme to be commenced or implemented before any further work takes place.
Yeah, Brian makes a really good point there, and I'll come back on that. And another point which has occurred going through the presentation, I think that's really important because we have struggled to enforce previous landscaping on the site, and we do need to make sure that we monitor this. They are required to carry out the development, the landscaping, to meet the required biodiversity net gain requirement, and I can assure members that officers, including myself, will actively monitor this to make sure it's carried out. We would like to see it carried out in this winter 2025-26 planting season, and I see no reason why it can't be carried out. It wouldn't prejudice, in my view, the carrying out of the extension works. in any way. And so, yes, I would be amenable to an amendment to the condition to add that. I should also like to point out, and just go back to the application site plan, which you'll note there that the applicant has outlined the whole of the western field, including this dwelling, as the application site. Clearly that field is largely in agricultural use, so I would like to ask for an additional condition, if members were to approve this, that defines the use only to be the area of the building itself and its immediate curtilage, and that all the land west of the proposed hedgerow on this plan, that plan there, so the business use is restricted to this area here, and that all of this area, which is within the red area land, is retained as agricultural land, so there's no creeping change of use by default. Thank you, Chair.
Can you be absolutely clear what you're asking for as a condition there, please?
It's a condition, yeah, to define the area of the approved use, to make sure there's no inadvertent change of use of the whole of that field.
Okay. Could you just, I'll be with you, Mike, half a second. I've got two plans. There's the sort of coloured one with the additional planting on it, which we were told about yesterday at the top. And then the one before that has got lots of little trees scattered all over it. Have we abandoned the trees?
Yeah, no, this was, if you see from the history, when the application was first submitted, the applicant had proposed further development in the field to the west in the form of a swimming pool and tennis court. So it was more extensive development, which has been omitted for the proposal. And for the purpose of this is a site plan, the proposed site plan. He omitted those additional works, but left in the proposed tree planting designed to hide that additional work. So with that being omitted, and our desire to keep the field open, he amended that and amended the biodiversity net gain plan. And this is now the proposed plan, and this is the plan which will be conditioned as part of any approval.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Yes, thank you, John, for the presentation. This has been a tricky one, as I've sat in on some of the previous applications in the past, and what we're looking at is a field that has had part of the land annexed for this purpose. So we're effectively having the field boundary redrawn, not withdrawn. When I asked you about because like Brian, I was concerned that if you that they could just go ahead and build the extension ahead of the tree planting for the boundary. That can't be started until the autumn. I think it was the answer you gave me yesterday, because if you plant in the summer, it doesn't. Yes. Yeah, it doesn't work. But I can't see what would stop them from putting in foundations and doing preparatory work on the extension. So I'm not sure whether you can effectively condition it, given their past history of just going ahead and doing what they feel like.
I think that's a very important question. I don't know whether it's a legal question or a planning question, but I think we need to be very clear about what we're saying about the landscaping.
Yes, well, obviously it's a 3-year implementation period to start. Bearing in mind past performance is no guarantee that we'll carry in the same way, but they could start work immediately upon gaining any consent if one was to be granted today, and the extension could be up before the start of the winter planting season, which normally starts around November to March the following year, when you would put in things like hedging and other trees. So I think it's important that unless there are any objections from the applicant, and we could add to the end of this implementation during that period, the winter 25-26 period, unless an alternative timescale is agreed in writing with the National Park Authority, should they have any objections to that. But the starting point is that's carried out. I think Adam wants to add an addendum to that.
I've just got a thought. The condition 5 says, in the first planting season following construction of the development, and that could be interpreted as in many ways what construction means. If it said in the first planting season following the commencement of the development, that would mean whether it was started now or in 3 years' time, the first planting season after they start putting in footings, they have to do the landscape, and I think that's probably the best you can do.
Yes, I agree with that. Right, I know more than Ken. I think you put your hand up. And
Thanks, Chair. It was
and Bill.
Pretty much on that. But from a construction point of view, it seems to me, for example, if you go back to the, you could start planting that hedge from the road access point up to the gap. That's from a practical construction perspective, you're not going to retain any planting while you're constructing the car parking spaces and hard standing. It's just not going to work. So I think my suggestion was going to be before occupation of the building, but I think that's an alternative option. Yeah. But certainly it doesn't preclude planting all the way from the access point to quite almost to the top of the drive as an indication of good intent. From I was going to say, Chair, with this, I think the place fulfills a positive need. Our officers see no problem with the principle. I'm happy to move the recommendation, Chair.
Right, thank you.
With subject to those modifications.
Right, I've got Bill next and then Matt.
Briefly, hopefully. A couple of things. When we went to the site yesterday, it was clear that this is quite an open site, and the hedge planting and that is very good. I actually think I'm looking at the plan, which has the swimming pool and tennis courts removed, but it's still got those trees on. I think having trees the other side of that hedge would add to that landscape value. It's quite an attractive site. The trees and the buildings made it look quite attractive, and I think some more trees there would have two effects. Obviously, in terms of positive in biodiversity, it would also screen the development even more and make it an even pleasanter site. But thirdly, third point is a hedge can easily be broken through at some point. A hedge is not a deterrent for future development, but if you have more mature trees in that area, that is a significant enhancement to the landscape and making a statement about what that area is about. It doesn't need to be a forest, but something similar to what's shown on the plan that's in front of me. So that's the other plan, the previous plan, which has shown, this plan has got the word swimming pool removed and paved area reduced, tennis court and associated landscaping removed. So I would recommend that, definitely. And then there was concern about the track, which we're going to investigate. The track is a limestone chipping track, which is very unattractive, not part of the local landscape, unless I've got my geology very wrong. And there needs to be a condition about that track as well. There were some suggestions that we're going to investigate whether that was a condition that hadn't been met before. And I think that the ugly side of that development was that open car park at the top, which, that should be landscaped as much as possible, as shown on that plan, actually. Yeah, thank you.
Before I come on to Matt, can I just get that last question answered? I agree with Bill about that driveway. Is that has been approved or as is allowed, or is it something else? Or can we just investigate that?
I think I'll have to come back and say to members that what we'll do is we'll investigate the previous permission and see what conditions or detailed plans that we can that give us any degree of control over that. That'll be the starting point. If that doesn't do that, and bearing in mind it's outside the application site area for this particular application, if I
okay. Well, except you might be able to enforce on it.
We can still go back to the applicant and seek better practice going forward in terms of surfacing of that, because I agree with the member. It's bright white, and you'd expect to see a darker gritstone coloured access track in that landscape.
Matt?
Yeah, it was in response to Brian's point. Are you saying that they haven't complied with landscaping conditions from previous developments?
Yeah.
Is there a way that we can condition them doing those in this development and say, if you give your planning permission based on the fact that it's a planning consent based on the previous schemes. If they haven't done the landscaping schemes, then they're doing it, and then it's a development on a different place, which we don't give permission for.
I think to some extent that's exactly what's happening now, isn't it? That we are putting in place with conditions some of the landscaping that was asked for last time round.
It is now incumbent on us to monitor the site carefully and fully enforce those conditions to make sure they're fulfilled. A, for landscape protection, but also B, to achieve the biodiversity net gain outcome which is required.
But that will be about things which are in their net gain plan from this application, whereas is there any mechanism for us to say you have, because your baseline is their baseline will be based on the site as it should be, not the site as it is.
We've incorporated, we've incorporated, particularly with the view of that hedge, we've incorporated the landscaping within this scheme, which hasn't been done in the previous one. And the key part of that hedgerow and that division between the two halves of the site, effectively. So we're satisfied that within this landscaping scheme, B&G plan, that we're achieving the end result which we should have had there been compliant with the previous conditions, landscaping ones in the past. So,
can I take you up then on Bill's point about the need for more trees, which at first sight seems a jolly good idea, but it suddenly occurred to me as I was asking the question that it's a jolly good way of disguising the site at the top so that they can build further. What about more trees?
Well, that's a judgment that you can make as members. Our judgment was that the scheme before us now in this amended plan is sufficient to achieve both the landscape screening and the BNG. So if you disagreed and felt further tree planting was required to protect the special landscape in this area, then that's within your gift. Officers' view is that we've got enough to meet a recommendation of approval in this particular case.
Yeah, just to follow up what Matt was saying there, I think that's right. I mean, can there be a condition that...
sorry, just got you.
Oh, sorry. To say what... Oh,
sorry.
Can there be a condition to say they need to complete the previous application before they start on the next one, which is basically what you were saying, which seems reasonable to me, to put in the hedge, and that would solve all the problems about when the hedge is put in. And then you've done that, brilliant. Now you can set off with the next phase of development, which would seem a fair way of doing it. I mean, it's their problem that they haven't completed the development, not ours.
Planning legislation sadly doesn't work like that. But what we're actually asking for here is, as I understand it, is the same thing that occurred in the last thing, i.e. a hedge up the road and a bit of extra planting at the top. So one way or another we're getting that. Rachel.
Sorry, I don't understand what you've described, John. So sorry if I'm not understanding this. But so what Matt asked was they had an original plan. It had some landscaping in that had a BNG uplift. They've not delivered that BNG uplift. So or was that not subject to BNG? No. Right, okay. But but what baseline are we using? Are we using the baseline of the site as it is in reality, i.e. they've not delivered the plan that they should have done already, or are we using the baseline of uplift from the plan that they should have delivered to what we're hoping to achieve through this application? That's the bit that I don't understand, because I think they're two very, very different things.
As far as I'm aware, the baseline they've used for the BNG is the site as existing prior to this, that doesn't incorporate the previous planting that they should have done. But the previous applications weren't subject to BNG. The principal landscape element that we wanted to see was that hedgerow or other planting to divide the two halves of the site, which we're achieving here. I think the site has changed quite a bit since those former permissions, and the conditions are potentially out of time for us to enforce. So we've taken the view that this application consolidates the landscaping, and if it's approved under condition, it gives us a very firm, clear conditions to enforce, monitor, and then properly enforce delivery of that landscaping to achieve what the site should have.
I get that, but my concern is that they should have already delivered that landscape uplift, no matter whether BNG was in train or not.
Exactly.
They haven't done that, so then we're saying, well, that's kind of all right, because you're going to deliver it in this next one, and we're taking that as the baseline. And I think we should take the baseline from where it should be to further enhance the landscape.
In that case, that takes up the point that we've just made earlier on, Bill's point, which is that we want a further planting scheme. Would that deal with it? Right. I've got Mike next, then Ginny.
I just wanted to go back to the Westfield. Is there anything more that we can do to protect that? Because like you, Patrick, I'm concerned that 2 or 3 years down the line we could have an application come forward for building further across on the west side.
Well, I think the only way you're going to usefully achieve that, I mean, John has outlined the condition that is intended to limit it, but perhaps the way of dealing with it is Bill's argument, which is that if you plant trees, it's more difficult for them to be just wiped out, whereas a hedge is quite easy. So I mean, I think that additional tree planting. And I think the reason needs to include Rachel's point when we're writing it in the actual decision notice. It actually needs to make it clear why we're asking for it.
I would like to make some comments before we go to.
Well, you make your comments, and then Ginny can make.
Yeah, but
please do.
Well, we're at the question stage, aren't we?
No, we're not. We don't. We're not as formal as that. You make your point.
Yesterday, my wife reminded me that historically, Hollow Meadows, the big buildings which have been converted to flats, which are to the east of this site, were housing people with learning disabilities and had mental health issues, shall we say. So in some ways, I suppose we shouldn't be surprised that there has been a return to providing care for people, in this case it's people on the autism spectrum, in landscapes that are more isolated and do provide peace and calm. It's sort of expanding a bit on what Ken was saying earlier. So I think the committee should be mindful that there is good work going on here which benefits people. But at the same time, as an authority, we do expect planning conditions to be adhered to.
Thank you very much. And I have Ginny next.
Thank you, Chair. All the points I was going to make have actually been made, but I would just point out that the biodiversity net gain is actually covered in paragraph 68, where showing the proposed development would be 22.9% net gain on site area habitat and 62.4% on linear habitat. So that's from the base as it should have been.
So it's, what I can't possibly wrap my mind around is what the base we've now established is and what that figure would look like in that situation. Do you understand the point I'm making? I think Rachel does. I don't think, look, there's a limit to how far we can go here. If we add the additional condition with a clear reason for it and how it's related to it, we can take it on from there. And I think that's what we should do. I'm really wanting, no, I'm going to start, we're getting near to it now, and I don't want to keep going round in circles with the discussion. Matt, briefly, Bill, briefly, and then I'm going to wrap up and take a vote.
It was to reinforce your point about the BNG, that it would be good to see the baseline, because what they've said here is that there is significantly ahead of the BNG. They've done significantly more than the BNG requires them to, but they haven't, because the baseline is a flawed baseline. Okay. So I think that we need to see a BNG metric showing that it's above it is delivering above the required level, to demonstrate to future people that you can't not comply with conditions and then use that as your baseline. You know, there is a mandatory requirement to do this. We need to see that they've done what they're supposed to have done.
So the condition will be before development is commenced, etc. These things will be addressed. Bill.
Very briefly, so I'm assuming that in the event that development starts, for sake of argument, this year, this summer, and the hedge isn't laid and the trees aren't planted, that the authority would start taking enforcement action in April of next year. Because otherwise, we're just saying, you know, just go ahead, we're not bothered. So that is a commitment, I think, to us here, isn't it?
Right. Thank you for that. Now, I've had a motion from Ken. Are you happy to accept the amendment to the conditions that address these complicated issues? Are you seconding it, Mike? Thanks, very helpful. And has anybody got any amendment to that? In that case, on that basis, the motion is that this be approved on the terms that we've been discussing. All those in favour? All those against? No, that's carried unanimously. Can I just add that I would really like a note made in the minutes, and it's not a decision, but that we would very much expect this to be carefully monitored so that this landscaping scheme is properly installed at the right time. Right, move on. It's 11:15. Does anybody want a break by any chance? I'm happy to carry on. What? No, that's good. We are taking a long. We should be. This meeting should be over by now. We should be making a bit of progress. Now let's deal with the campsite at Burley Lane, Hathersage, quickly.
Yes, this is an application by the National Park Authority itself for creation of 3 additional camper van spaces and 11 parking spaces at the North Leeds campsite, which is in the open country to the north of Hathersage, as all will know. This is the campsite. You've got the facilities building, camping fields, and the access up from Burley Lane. Currently, you've got a camper van pitch here, hedgerow planting either side, fairly recent, and as proposed is the relocation of that existing camper van space and the creation of 3 new ones here. So you've got 4 camper van spaces along there, relocated hedging and bunding to the north, relocated hedging and bunding to the south, and these are the position of the 11 car parking spaces. You've got additional planting here, and in addition further planting within the woodland that surrounds the site and around the entrance to provide additional planting to enhance the screening, because there's been a reduction in the understory planting. From our point of view, it provides additional spaces to meet demand in the area, and it can be accommodated without harm to landscape or neighbouring amenity, because the neighbouring properties are some distance away and wouldn't be affected by this. I'll just quickly run through the slides. That's just a zoomed in version of the plan I've just been showing you. And context, this is looking up the site. The facilities building is behind you to the left. So you can see the semi-mature hedging either side of the track, which will be carefully replanted, and the bunds widened to create space for the development. So this is looking back the other way. You can see through at this time of year, through the trees to the Burley Lane as it climbs up behind the site. And this is looking up from the entrance. And again, view from Burley Lane, showing how the site is much more open in recent years than it used to be. So the additional landscaping is welcomed. And then a further view higher up Burley Lane. So this is where the development is going to take place, in that area there. So just briefly, it's appropriately modest scale extension to the existing campsite within our adopted policies. The amended plans demonstrate it can be accommodated without harm. And just to add, there were some concerns from the parish council about vehicular movements to and from the site, the property team have agreed, as part of agreeing the amended landscaping plan, to install signs within the site, screened from outside, advising care when vehicles exit the site and advising them to leave the site in an easterly direction, which takes them out on more appropriate road network than going down Burley Lane into the heart of the village, although there's no formal restriction on that. That would just be advisory signage to help alleviate that issue. And our authorities, ecologist and landscape officer, are happy with the amended plan and the changes, so recommend approval. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think we saw this on the annual inspection last year, didn't we? And it was we were shown it then. I'm perfectly happy to move this from the chair, actually. That's seconded. Has any other member got any comments to make on this? No? Okay. All those in favour? Anyone against? That's all carried. Thank you very much. The next item on the... Now, I'm conscious of the time. Okay. Well, we'll just have to carry on, I think. So agenda item 9, Reapsmore Longner petrol motor repair business. And who's dealing with this? Adam.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this application is for the change of use of an agricultural building to a vehicle repair garage. Members looked at this site yesterday, put the laser pointer on in the presentation. So the site is in countryside south of Longner in Reapsmore. The buildings are here. It is a farmstead, but the buildings are no longer in use for agriculture. This land is in ownership control, Land Edge Blue, but that's being let out to another farmer. So the occupants no longer carry out agriculture on the site. We zoom into the group of buildings here. You can see, we saw on site, this is the farmhouse, and then there's a range of more modern agricultural buildings around them. And here's the building which has been converted to a vehicle repair garage, and this area here is where proposed parking is for the garage. So this is the building, a fairly functional, modest agricultural building which has been converted so that you come in from the yard in this direction, and we saw this front area is being used as a workshop with a vehicle ramp and tools in it, and there at the back is used for storage. But the proposal is for the use of the entire building for this purpose. So this is the building. As you can see, fairly functional, modern building. So the use is taking place in there. The door is shut there. When we visited the site, that door was open and the applicant was working on a vehicle. And you can see this is the yard where cars are parked. This is the view from the road. See the building in the background there. And this is the farmhouse and the farm buildings. And then this is the view from the access. That's towards Longner. And then that's looking south. So the application is recommended for refusal on the issue of principle of whether this is a sustainable location for this type of development. It's not a working farm, and so the application isn't farm diversification. And for the reasons set out in the report, officers have recommended refusal on the basis that the site isn't in a sustainable location. Our policies would normally direct a development like this to our named settlements. And so the application is recommended for refusal for that reason. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a speaker. Yes.
I'm making this representation as the applicant for permission to change the use of an existing farm building so that it may continue to be used as a commercial garage. In doing so, I hope to clarify the scale and nature of my business and offer perspective to any perceived impact on the surrounding area and neighbours. The business is currently a very small family operation, my wife in an administrative role and my father-in-law in a helping hand role, whilst I carry out a small-scale vehicle repair operation. This is unlikely to be expanded upon in the near future, other than perhaps accepting a trainee. I feel that sometimes garages are perceived as dirty, oily, smelly places, so I'd like to clarify that there is no environmental impact at all created by my business. There are only a small amount of customer cars present on site, usually less than 5 in a week. We have a fully licensed waste disposal contract with the local council for waste disposal. Likewise, a contract for oil filter, waste oil and scrap metal removal, all of which are effectively stored so not to impact the environment. Living on site means we very carefully consider what we would like to see out of our windows. As the business makes more money, we will improve the yard and building to make it fit even better with its surroundings. It was derelict prior to me starting the business. As an ex-farming family, we have no plans to halt the agricultural use and status of the existing ground, and have a son who, if in the future wanted to farm, we would ensure the two coexist. However, I would like to point out that due to the small scale of the farm, that from agriculture alone it would be difficult to make a living. Currently, the ground is rented out for agricultural use separate from the yard and buildings. We have never heard complaint from our neighbours. To put this into perspective, one of our neighbours was actually recently recommended they try me by their regular garage for a specialist repair. They didn't even know we were here. We don't make a lot of noise, I don't work after dark, and I'm very respectful to my neighbours, most of whom are my customers.
Thank you very much. We did a site visit yesterday. Members? Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's sort of various issues here. There are a lot of what seem to be empty or underused or unused ex-agricultural buildings on the site, which could see an expansion of the business. There is advertising. I know that's a separate matter, but whether if the application was to go ahead, there's landscaping, and there's also looking at planning issues. So the planning issues are quite clear about this sort of development, this sort of area. Although set against that, there is the provision of facilities in a very remote rural location whereby people don't have to travel further afield. So I think it's quite a difficult one. And there are amenity, landscape issues, as well as the principle of providing a service. I'd just be concerned about, it may be that that's what we want, about the site could develop as a mini industrial estate. Is that what we want? Because there are other opportunities to develop the business in other ways on the site, and this could be a way in. Alternatively, we could look at that and consider that just on its merits. So it's quite a difficult one, this, I think.
Matt?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear about the views on sustainability of it, because as they said, anybody in this area who was taking their vehicle to somewhere else to get repaired, is it going to have to go quite a long way? That does seem a reasonable thing to do in terms of sort of decentralising stuff rather than having to go to Buxton, for example. So what are the grounds for saying that it's not a sustainable location for doing it? I completely agree with Bill's stuff around what you don't want to do is to say what this is effectively now as an industrial estate, but that's not that's not necessarily.
I understand the point you're making. Mike?
Thank you, Chair. With the change of use, what use class does it move to?
B2.
Right,
General
so
industry.
it's not sui generis.
No.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So it can't suddenly become a scrapyard a couple of years down the line.
No, a scrapyard is a sui generis use, but it could become, if it wasn't conditioned, and I've got conditioned, but if it wasn't conditioned, it could become steel fabrication. You know, went to the site like that.
Yeah.
It could be any industrial use. Yeah.
Yeah. The other concern I have is, were we to give permission for I mean, apart from the concerns already raised by Bill and Matt, is over advertising. What would conditioning advertising as a
We can't
a local
condition
garage?
advertising on a planning permission. Advertisement consent is a separate consent regime, and you can't condition that through a planning permission. The business would have certain deemed consents for advertisements, so the business would be able to put up adverts up to a certain size, but we couldn't condition that through the planning permission.
But what you could do is to define the use of the site to a particular boundary, and the advertisements would have to be related to that boundary, if that was to be the case. Any other members got any thoughts on this? Ginny?
Thank you. I didn't have the benefit of going on the site visit yesterday, but to me this just feels like a good opportunity to support somebody local taking up, using a building that's redundant at the moment. But I would want it tied to the occupants of the house, the occupation of the house, if we were to approve that. And to put some very strict conditions on, and maybe some additional screening, so that this is not so visible from it's not a particularly attractive looking building, so this is not so visible from the road. But the big concern about a garage is that you get a lot of disused or redundant vehicles that are basically waiting for scrap. So I think there needs to be very strong conditions as to what, if we were to approve this, as to what we would not tolerate as being acceptable in the landscape of basically having a scrap heap.
Okay. I'm not trying to steer this in one way or another, but just to help the discussion, could you just outline the sort of conditions you would have in mind?
Yeah, a number of them pick up a number of the issues already raised. So the first one, the use ancillary to remain within a single planning unit with the house. So it retains as a single planning unit. Restrict the use to a repair garage and for no other purpose, including in Class B2. So if they wanted to change to any other use, they needed to come back to us. Hours of operation, hours of deliveries, no use of power tools or machinery outside the building at any time. No external lighting other in accordance with approved details. No scrap vehicles, waste or other materials to be stored outside the building. Now I was thinking you could, in that condition, you could have scope for them to agree details of like a little compound, say by the side of the building, for them to put in like the used tyres and scrap before they're collected. As long as it's hidden, we could approve those details. Maintain the visibility displays. The hedge would have to be maintained at a 900mm height, which on site yesterday it was a bit lower than that photograph. And then agree scheme of landscaping. So it could be additional planting, it could be some walling or whatever to screen that a bit better.
And would you, is the site boundary clearly enough marked to restrain the activities within a suitable area? Do you see the question I'm trying to put?
That's the site boundary there. I think it is, other than perhaps that area at the front of the site. See there.
Yeah, it did seem to me that if you were going to put something there, you would want to contain it, and there would need to be a condition like that. Well, I mean, the arguments go both ways. I've now got lots of hands going up now that everybody understands it. So let's start with Ken, then Mike, then Bill.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of detail on the potential conditions that have been shared with us. I wonder whether in terms of storage of things like used tyres, bits of scrap and the rest of it, given that those other buildings are redundant, whether, depending on whether I can't remember exactly whether the condition was to agree a compound or to agree how those things might be stored, whether in fact they might be stored inside one of those other redundant buildings, for example.
Yeah.
I know it's not in the...
It's not in the red
boundary.
edge. You could potentially have a Grampian condition which require those details to be agreed. And if that was within a building, whatever procedural route would need it to be done to agree with that, then that would be acceptable, potentially, yeah.
Okay. Mike?
Ken's raised my point.
Okay.
Happy with that.
And Bill?
Yeah, just on terms of parking, because the site area is quite big, so there's already quite a few cars. I know we've all been to garages, and depending on how the garage is managed, I'm sure this is managed very well. You can get almost an unlimited number of cars on the site, can't you? People leaving cars waiting to be done, cars left there, cars have broken down. So can we limit the amount of car parking in some way on the site? Because it's still quite a big area, that, I think, when we were there yesterday.
I'd go one stage further than that. Is it possible to extend the solid walling, for example, along the field boundary, and perhaps even raise it in height to mask the cars and things like that?
Yes, that's possible as part of a landscaping scheme.
Okay.
In terms of limiting numbers of cars, that's tricky. Yes, you could have a planning condition on that says there should be no more than X vehicles any time, and that is enforceable, but that is very difficult to enforce and detect a breach. I mean, clearly, if a site becomes swamped with vehicles over time, then...
You'd be better actually limiting the size of the site so that there's only so many cars that can go in it.
For instance, just to point out, so that area in the front and that building, I think, is included on the application plan, isn't it? So I'm not sure whether we want cars parked on the front there.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that building is, but that area to the front of it is, and I'm not sure why it is, but goes to Patrick's point about agreeing the extent of the use. I think if we put a condition on to agree effectively, notwithstanding that plan, the extent of the use, then that's probably the better way of doing it.
Can I make a suggestion that if we were minded to approve this, would it be better for us to say that we are minded to approve it and leave it to you to go and get the application in a form that you then know you can enforce on should it become necessary?
Yes, we could ask for an amended plan in advance of approving it.
I think that might be the case if that's the direction we're going in. I don't.
Sorry. In my capacity, I have to look at the compliance with strategic policies as well, and there is an element of this which is contrary to policy, being business development in the open countryside, and there are some more strict rules about that. And normally we would say in our settlements there is scope for small business, and actually we want to promote good local business in the countryside. In places like this, especially where the nature of settlement is different, it's more fragmented. Matt's points about where businesses are and the nature of how people operate as communities is significant. Normally we'd be expecting to drive these into traditional buildings for part of conservation drive. Where they aren't available, the use of more modern buildings can be acceptable, provided that there's no other scope for further enhancement on the site through a more appropriate replacement building. Now that isn't proposed here, and we're kind of keeping this kind of functional fabric building, so the enhancement test isn't met in that regard. So I think it's important that when you say you move to more remote, sensitive locations, that drive for enhancement becomes more significant. So I'm quite happy with the way you're going. There's a balance of considerations here, and you could say it's contrary to policy. I think for the purposes of minutes, because one choice I could refer it back, but I don't think it's necessary here. But I think we need to record it's contrary to strategic policy E2, but accepted as very small scale, serving an important local service, very limited harm, and capable of being mitigated. And I think it's just, I think if we capture that here, I don't need to refer it back. You can see that there is, some scope for reuse of other buildings, but normally we'd be looking to remove buildings like that. And actually, if it was a site that grew potential, or there was a desire to, that question might come back again. They might be looking for an improved fabric to that site. We're not getting it this time, but we're thinking on balance, it sounds like members could be okay with it.
not quite the head of planning saying he supports it, but he's... Matt, and then I want somebody to make propose something. Matt, very quickly.
Yeah, it reminds me of another application where a building was falling down, and there was obviously nothing that was going to happen to it, and it's like, well, you can't make them take it down. It'd be really good to know what we can do in terms of asking people to remove redundant buildings, and whether there are opportunities, because it's not the most attractive location within the national park. Is there stuff that we can do in terms of enhancement? Is there stuff that we can do in terms of the rest of the site as well? Do you know what I mean? We've had situations before where we said, look, the best thing to do here is the building not to have been built. The second best thing is for it to be used in another, is to be made better, but we can't actually insist on it. The worst thing that could happen is that we just let it fall down. It'd be good to know, what power we've got over any of that.
First power is a refusal because it doesn't do the enhancement, and see whether there's another scheme came back, or whether there's any other design improvements that could be clad. I'm not sure if that's practical on a building like this, or even viable at the scale of the business that we're talking about. So I think there's some constraints to achieving the enhancement here that then be balanced against what we've talked about.
And actually, having heard that, should there be another condition about any alterations to the building needing our approval? Because there are permitted development rights for certain buildings, aren't there?
There are permitted development rights for industrial buildings. I'm not sure any of them would apply here, but yes.
I think it would be a good belt and braces.
We could do, yeah.
Yes. Look, I'm going to I'm getting the mood of the meeting. I may have got that mood wrong, but I'm going to move this for approval, subject to the conditions that we've been hearing about, but on the basis that we're minded to approve it, and we'd ask the planning officer to go and make sure that it's in a form that is approvable.
So it's delegated back.
It's delegated back to the officers to get the application right, so that they can then permit it with all those caveats addressed. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you very much. All those in favour? Anyone against? No, there isn't. Okay, that's good. Thank you. 20 to 12. And the next application I've got on the agenda is South Church Street, Bakewell. Is that what you're here for, sir? Yes. It is. Can we see if Nick Marriott's outside? He should be here as well.
If not, could we have
he's
comfort?
Here. He's arrived. Right. We're on to your item now. It's agenda item 10, South Church Street, Bakewell. And Adam, you're introducing this again.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, members went to have a good look at this site yesterday. Site's in Bakewell, right in the heart of Bakewell. There's the access to the properties here, and the main property. Well, the buildings are here, and then the garden is in the front of the building. And the neighbouring properties, which we'll look at in a minute, are here, located in that area there. We are in the conservation area. So this is the existing situation. So this is turned around, unfortunately, from what we've just looked at. So north is the other way round. So that the house is now on the right-hand side, and its garden is on the left-hand side. So at the moment there's a lawn, terrace, and a driveway, which is loose gravel, and there is a shed in this corner here. And the proposal is to demolish that shed and build a garage and workshop, which you can see on that plan. So the garage and workshop is larger than the existing shed and will provide space for a single parking space and a workshop and store. As you can see, it'll be built out of stone and slate. So the neighbouring properties here are located around these boundaries here, which we'll look at in a minute. So this plan has been supplied by the agent to show the relationship with two neighbouring properties. This property, so this is looking at the front of the garage, and that 3D helps you visualise it a little bit better there. So this property here is Erica Cottage. No, sorry, that's Barnes Cottage. This is 3 South Church Street here, which is a separate property, and Erica Cottage is here. So this pink line there shows this section. So this is the garage as proposed, and as you can see, the land then drops down to the garden of Barnes Cottage, and this shows that the gable of the garage and workshop would be 13 metres away from their elevation, and then the ground floor window would, measured from a 45-degree angle, would see over the top of it, top of the building. And this is the section relative to Erica Cottage, which again you can see the land drops down, and then they've got a small area of garden, and this is the back of their property, which we'll look at photos of in a minute, showing a 25-degree angle. You look over the roof. Both of these properties are impinged by this development, and part of the issue that we have to consider quite carefully here is whether this building is going to have an unacceptable impact on the amenity of the occupants of these properties. So just looking at the photographs, you see Barnes Cottage there, and Erica Cottage here. I'll point out this, better one's the best word, blue dormer here. And obviously you can see the stone boundaries, and that's the existing shed where the garage is proposed to be. And then this is looking from the site to Barnes Cottage. As you can see, the land drops down. Their garden's a bit lower. And you can see their windows to their rooms there. And then you can see the relationship with Erica Cottage. You can see it's fairly close to the boundary. And then this room here is lit by this window and also this glazed openings here as well. And then this is just looking back at the host property, which is a range of converted buildings which was granted about 15 years ago. So I'll leave it on that so we can just look at that relationship a bit closely. So this is an amended plan. The scale of the garage has been reduced slightly, and it's been brought away from the boundaries by a metre, as you can see on that plan. We've reconsulted the neighbouring properties. There are objections from neighbouring properties on amenity grounds, concerns about impact on their outlook, their light, and we've looked at that carefully, and as you can see, the agent's provided more information. We're satisfied that the building will not be overbearing to either property or oppressive, and that the building will not really result in any significant loss of light to any habitable rooms. There will be a change, but our view is that that change would not be significant enough to warrant a refusal on planning grounds. But that is the main issue for members to grapple with today. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We have 2 speakers. The first one is Mr. Colebrook. If you would like to come forward to the chair in the middle here. Have you been before us before? No, you haven't. There's a little button on that which will turn on a red light behind the microphone, and then when you're ready, you have 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
My first point refers to number 53 in the report. I would like to clarify that there are 3 properties, not 2, that are most affected by the development. The report states that the distance from Barnes Cottage to the gable elevation of the development will be 13 metres, and that's it. There is no mention at all about the distance from our home, Erica Cottage, to the rear wall of the development, which would be 2.5 metres. This proximity to our property, which has clearly been overlooked in the report, as it has not been mentioned, would leave us with an overshadowing and overbearing presence from the proposed building.
Sorry, can I just stop you, because you're talking about yours and somebody else's properties, and I'm not sure where you live. I wonder, where could we get him on the plan?
Erica Cottage.
I think where the
That's the one with the upstairs projection at the back.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt you.
get that time back, I'm guessing, yeah. Would leave us with an overshadowing, overbearing presence from the proposed building. This view was supported by Bakewell Town Council in their decision to object to the plans on a number of grounds. Point 56 does acknowledge that there would be a perception of overbearing. This is supposedly mitigated by the roof slope and the building being away from the boundary. As mentioned, the building is only 2.5 metres away from our lounge window, and even with reduction of height, I would look out directly into the guttering. This would be even worse for my children inside the property and outside. They would be dwarfed by such a building so close to the boundary that the roof slope is irrelevant. The difference in ground levels will add to the overbearing presence. Point 59 of the report implies that it's our window which presents a greater amenity issue for the applicants. This window has been there long before the Barnes was a holiday business. Point 60 states that the erection of a garage would mitigate any overlooking of the applicant's garden and main front elevations. The position of our window was not an issue when the applicant converted the barns from workshops into holiday accommodation. If the planting scheme had been adhered to, it would have mitigated any issue. This garage and workshop, which will be built to keep holidaymakers' cars dry, will be to the detriment of myself and my young family, my neighbours and the surrounding conservation area. Point 70 concludes that this is an appropriate scale. How can this be the case? When mentioned, it will overshadow our habitable room in our lounge and kitchen/diner, but also our garden space and main patio area, which we enjoy with our children. Another issue is the potential loss of mature trees, which is protected within the conservation area. And according to the Peak Park Tree Conservation Officer, no foundation should be within 6.13 metres of the tree. The loss of such a tree would have a negative impact on the conservation area, as it can be seen from within the public realm and provides a vital habitat for many birds. The planning history of the site removed permitted rights. This has been ignored with the erection of a timber shed, which was unauthorised as clarified in point 40 of the report. It was a condition of the original planning application that no development outside the original building would be allowed. Nearly done. Ourselves and neighbours were happy with these safeguards and cannot understand that this application has come so far when these restrictions were already put in place by Peak Park. I would finish by inviting the committee to visit the site and see firsthand the scale of development, its surrounding and the impact it will have on ourselves, neighbours and the wider community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I just assure you we did do a site visit yesterday?
Yes, but you're welcome to come to our property to
Oh,
do
I
a
see.
site visit.
Okay.
Okay.
The next speaker I have is Nick Marriott.
I obviously can't address every point raised as an objection. 3 minutes simply isn't enough. The officer's report is detailed and addresses the comments received, so I'll limit my words to explaining the need for the garage and explain how the applicant has responded to the objections raised where appropriate. The site benefits from planning permission to be used as an unrestricted dwelling. As such, its recent use as a holiday cottage is also lawful within its use class. The applicants have operated it as a holiday accommodation as a source of income whilst they retained the tenancy of the Queen's Arms in Bakewell. That tenancy concludes shortly and they intend to make the barn their long-term home when they leave the pub. The garage is needed for the purposes of storing the applicant's car and secure storage for bicycles and other domestic paraphernalia. The workshop is intended for nothing more than the usual domestic man-shed, tinkering, garden implements, etc. In response to the received objections and my subsequent discussions with Steve Coombs, the applicant conceded the usable attic space, which had been a specific requirement of the initial brief. That enabled me to significantly reduce the height. The overall footprint was slightly increased to accommodate a percentage of the lost floor area, but not all of it. The building was also moved slightly further away from the adjacent boundaries and neighbouring properties. As such, the officers believed the scheme should be supported as they believed we had addressed the material planning matters. The west-facing window in the dormer extension of Erica Cottage, which is the closest and faces the garage, presents an interesting dilemma. To play the devil's advocate, let's say the proposal does impact available light to that window. The question is then, does that loss of light result in an unreasonable amount of daylight to the room? In this instance, that wouldn't be the case, as the room in question also benefits from south-facing patio doors immediately adjacent and perpendicular to, providing more than the adequate sun and daylight. However, applying the 25-degree guidance set out by the BRE on the topic, the proposal is within the reasonable accepted limits, so it sends the devil's advocate on his way. It was also apparent to me and the case officer that without the proposed garage, the window in question, albeit entirely lawful, in fact represents a very real overlooking issue for my client. Ironically, the presence of the garage will address the issue of overlooking in both directions and secure some privacy for all concerned. As I said, I can't, at the beginning, I can't address all the objections raised because I simply don't have time now. I do probably have answers to questions if you want more information from me, and obviously with the Chair's permission, feel free to ask.
Thanks very much. Well, as I said, we did a site visit yesterday. Any member have any view on it, Bill?
Yeah, I think these are always difficult ones. We have to accept that's why they come here, and as a sort of matter of opinion, I think we've got to respect the objector or the objectors that there will be impinged by this development, as people always are by development, and it seems in particular in the case of the Erica Cottage, the development is very, very close by. The site is very unusual in that it's quite an open site in a quite densely packed park of Bakewell, and you only really appreciate it by going there or having a really detailed look at these photos to just get a sense of what's involved. It just occurred to me that it is quite a big ancillary building, and I just wondered whether there are better ways of achieving something similar by splitting up the garage and the workshop store. They just happen to be together. That's convenient. But one of the issues is the height, because there is already I gather a building or possibly an unauthorised building on that position there. Just go back to the previous one. So that sort of height, which possibly wouldn't be big enough for a garage, but if something could be reduced in terms of height and the building split up into two elements, that might help, particularly with the Erica Cottage, which I understand is the blue dormer building that we can see to the right there. Because I think there are issues here of overlooking and privacy and loss of amenity. It is a difficult one. Thank you.
I suspect that if you were to divide them into two, the higher of the two, which would be the garage, would still be in the same location because of the way the drive is fixed and that sort of thing. I don't know, but that's what I would guess. Ken?
Thank you, Chair. Bill's raised the kind of direction I was moving in. This illustration, if you can go to the previous illustration, it showed, no, it was the last, that's it, the site plan. It shows the apex level with the guttering of the property Barnes Cottage, which is really quite high. And I can understand the perspective of the objectors. Now, we've heard from the agent that there was a proposal to utilise the roof space. There's two questions. The first one is, why that location? When it's so close to the two properties, why couldn't it be, given that the proposal is to eat into the lawn area, why couldn't it be in the other corner? I can't remember precisely whether there was overlooking from that direction. The second question is, why the pitched roof if the roof space isn't going to be used? If there's a deemed need for a garage, do we have to have a pitched roof? Or could it be either very, very low angle, even lower than the existing shed, or even flat, or from a drainage perspective, perhaps slightly angled, given the issues that do come with flat roofs. This is a kind of variation on Bill's thing, about splitting them up. I can see the perceived need, but is this the only option for meeting that need, given the impact on the surrounding properties?
Okay. Kath and then Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Well, Bakewell Town Council are exemplary in their planning issues. They send me every document, sometimes they're this long each, and I feel that if Bakewell Town Council feels as they have said here, I don't feel I can support the application, because I know just how thorough they are and how caring they are, and they are an exemplary town council. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I've got Mike.
Yeah. Not going over ground that's already been raised. Come back to the point the objector made about the tree being within 6.8 metres of the proposed garage workshop location, and what consideration has been given to the tree roots. I take it the tree is in the neighbouring garden.
Yeah, we haven't had
Erica.
comments from the tree officer on this application, so I'm not sure exactly what that was in relation to. As they're not in the report anyway, so as far as I'm aware of.
Is it something we could have missed?
I don't think so. I mean, this is already, the trees are on the far side of boundary walls, so their roots and on lower ground. So their roots
couldn't get underneath.
They usually go away from the wall in the direction that they can go. I, based on my professional opinion, would say that it would be unlikely that this development would impact on those trees.
Yes, I would as well.
Okay.
Especially from what we saw on site. There was nothing obvious to me that stood out that I was concerned about in terms of trees.
Okay.
Right. No? Can we address that question that Ken has raised about whether alternatives have been looked at that might be more accommodatable?
Well, we've looked at this application and sought amendments, and officers have come to the conclusion, having assessed the application against our SPD and the BRE guidance, that this complies with that. So we've come to the conclusion that this proposal is acceptable, and it's a householder application, so the principles are acceptable. The design in itself, if it were in a different location, would be completely unobjectionable. In terms of are there other possibilities, yes, I'm sure the building could be sited a little further south. You'd have to move the drive around probably to achieve that, and that would be a choice for the applicant about whether they wish to do that. It may well be possible to look at a more contemporary building with a flat roof, a green roof or something like that. So there are other options. But obviously, as always, we have the application that's in front of us, and officers have assessed it on that basis. It's for members now to decide whether what's proposed is acceptable. If members consider it is not, then my view is that the application should be refused, and then we could look at alternative options and take it forward from there. Thank you.
Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I do think, listen to a few people now, and, the words of Bakewell, Town Council and what Cass said, I think there are other options that would satisfy the applicant and would considerably help or completely mitigate the objectors as well. So I move that we refuse it, with obviously a view that a new application will come back.
I'd like to be very clear about the grounds for refusal.
Yeah.
If you could.
So you asked me for grounds for refusal?
Yes, I think we need to be very clear about the grounds for refusal.
Because of the siting and massing of the building and its location, in particular to adjacent properties.
Okay, thank you. Somebody else put their hand up about something. Oh, that was you. Right, okay.
I get the siting location in terms of amenity, there's a few things that you look at. Overbearing, loss of light, and loss of privacy. In my view, there's no loss of privacy. So would it be an overbearing and loss of light concern.
Yeah.
Okay.
I could see the only thing that's really jarred with me on this is the idea that you've got a window looking straight out over somebody's gutter. But that's just me. I don't whether that counts as overbearing or not. I have no idea. But that's your motion. It's been seconded. Has any other member got any comment to make on this application? No. In that case, I shall put it to the vote that it be refused on those grounds. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those against? Those abstaining? 5 abstentions. Okay. Now we move on to... That's in here, isn't it? No, that's it. Let's go back to the agenda. The planning performance update, agenda item 11.
Yeah, it's just for members to note, following the problems that the planning service faced a couple of years ago, there's now good trends emerging in terms of the planning caseload in particular. Excellent performance, in fact. Around 85 to 90% of decisions being made in time, and you know that puts us in a very strong position. We've got growth in the team. 4, is it now, apprenticeships starting, and a real sense of career ladder emerging with resilience that gives within the management structure. So that's very pleasing to us, and it just allows all these kind of conversations and comms to be improved along the way. So that was important to report back. Intend to try and keep telling you this and bringing you this information once or twice a year if I can, just to kind of make sure that we're on track, because you know it's important in the context of the constraints that the authority is facing as a whole that our statutory function is performing well. There's some other recommendations that the Planning Advisory Service brought to us to continue looking at improvements to service. Some it's about speed, some it's about quality. And we're looking at a local validation list, which I think
we've had to look at.
We've looked
already.
at. That's come. We've got the standard conditions that we're looking at, so you know how quickly we can use conditions, and also a new piece of work around the inputs to the planning process from specialist areas. So we're looking at things like archaeology and buildings advice, and the number of applications that we consult on and the kind of responses we get back. Partly to kind of make that proportionate and to kind of free up some heritage officer time as well to do other things such as reviewing conservation areas, input into the local plan, FIPL advice, you know, on projects that are coming out there as well. There will be, we hope to bring forward a career graded conservation officer post as well. So there's some other kind of principles about the review that we're looking to go a bit further on now outside of the strict development management team as well. So it's just for noting, but good progress. Thank you.
I may have just noticed this actually. Can I just ask how the Ministry of Housing and whatever it is in local government are able to judge the quality of decisions made by the authority on applications for non-major development? I mean, what on earth do they look at? They can't look at all our planning applications and decisions, can they?
It's only major.
No, it says
well, they look at 3 categories.
the non-major.
Yeah, there's non-major district level category, which is most of our planning applications. There are other kind of bracket of majors, which are kind of county level, into the minerals cases, which are obviously much fewer. And there's other bracket of majors as well, isn't there? So district level majors as well as.
Yeah, it's county majors, district majors.
Yeah.
District line.
Yeah.
Okay,
So yeah, we do record all of that, but not the.
But I don't know how they judge the quality.
Well, it's based on the
We'll give you the
threshold.
precise answer. What they do is they take the total number of applications we determine, then they take the total number of appeals that we choose,
Well, what a stupid statistic. Okay, I think I've got Ken first, then I've got Kath, then Mike, then Ginny.
It was just, I think it would be appropriate, Chair, to record our support and congratulations to Brian and all the members of his teams for having got us to this point, got us to this place, and maintained our position given the where we were a couple of years ago. I think I'd like that to be minuted if members were comfortable with that.
We will make that into a resolution shortly. Kath?
I was highly delighted this week watching the news, the local news, when I see a welcoming place at the heart of the nation, to see that the authority was encouraging people in wheelchairs to actually rock climb. I thought it was tremendous, that item on the news, and congratulations.
Okay, I've got Mike.
Yes, I echo Ken's comments. This is an update report, so can you just remind the committee, or me in particular, when the annual report comes out? I do think there might be some other local authorities that might benefit.
I've tentatively agreed with Brian before the meeting that we would receive this about every 6 months, if that helps. I don't know that there's an annual report.
I see.
It's a monitoring report.
Yeah. There are bits of this data that go into the full authority, or we give some of the data back to the National Park family as well. So, the headlines of this go in at the authority.
Okay,
very good.
Ginny?
Thank you. Yes, I just wondered what the uptake was on the pre-application that you're getting. And also, you had a very successful forum of 20 agents last year. I just wondered if you were looking to repeat that at all, or whether it was too soon to do that, or what your thoughts were.
Yeah, pre-app. Last year, we had a historic sort of budget that we were aiming for, which we came into about 2/3 what we were aiming for, and that was pretty good, I thought, given that pre-app was just starting up. I've noticed this year we seem to be a bit busy with pre-apps, and people are engaging with the new charge for does it need permission, getting quite a few of those in. So I think it's going well. I think this, at the end of this financial year, we'll have a good idea of what the reality is in terms of engagement we have with people, but it doesn't seem to be putting people off. And we're getting good advice out. We've got new template reports, so the quality is better than it used to be when we had it under the old pre-application system, I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Right, Ken.
Sorry, I was just going to mention the agents. We've just put a request, an invite out to agents again for a meeting next month, with the focus this time being on design. We've started a review of the design guide and the other supplementary planning documents. We've asked ourselves how we use it, what we think the key elements of those guidance documents are, and we're inviting agents to come here next month and hopefully present some of their schemes as well, and just think through how they approach the design process, how you look at context, what kind of style, what kind of materials we use. There's issues about modern design, modern materials that come into that, different contexts. So we've got some interest from agents to do that. And that will inform our own design review. So that's in the next month.
Yeah, that's interesting. Right, Ken, would you like to put what you said earlier on into the form of a motion for us?
I think it would be to congratulate Brian and all members of his teams on achieving the current performance of the authority's development management function.
Thank you very much. Is that seconded? And all those in favour? All those against? Right, and the appeals outcomes all dismissed for once. There's nothing else here particularly of great interest, no? Okay, that does it. 10:12. Thank you very much for your attendance, and we'll see you in a month's time.